I'm going to open with a hypothetical. You've got two moving truck teams. Moving team A moves people from New York to other places in New York. Moving team B moves people from New York to New Jersey. They drive the same truck, they move the same type of furniture, they work for the same company. Nothing is different except moving team B moves people from New York to New Jersey. And guess what? They're exempt from overtime. Why? The Motor Carrier Act exemption. And you want to know something? There was just a bill proposed in Congress to repeal the Motor Carrier Act exemption. And so now is the perfect time to take a moment to discuss it. Now, before we jump in, I recognize that talking about overtime exemptions is not exactly the most exciting subject. It's probably as boring as watching grass grow. So I'm going to try to keep this kind of general and selectively go deeper. But if you want a really deep dive, I am truly happy to go over it personally with you. Just reach out to me. Okay, so let's jump in. The Fair Labor Standards Act is a federal law that requires the payment of overtime compensation that's 1.5 times your regular rate of pay after you work more than 40 hours in a week. However, not all employees are entitled to overtime compensation. They're called exempt, and there are many different types of exemptions. There are common ones like the executive exemption, which applies to managerial employees, and there are less common ones like employees who turn maple sap into maple syrup. Today, we are going to be discussing the Motor Carrier Act exemption. So who does it apply to? It applies to anyone whose job duties affect the safety of operations of a motor vehicle in interstate commerce. So this includes drivers, helpers, loaders, mechanics, and it could be others as well. The exemption also requires that the transportation be of people or property, and that the vehicle that's being used is 10,000 pounds or more. Okay, is everyone still with me? Because the next thing we're going to be talking about is going to knock your socks off. We're going to be discussing the definition of in interstate commerce. Don't leave me yet. It is exciting. I promise you it's exciting. There are two ways to meet the interstate commerce requirement. The first is obvious. If you drive across state lines, you meet the requirement. So moving truck B was exempt because they transported furniture from New York to New Jersey. The second way is not as obvious. The Motor Carrier Act applies to drivers who only drive within a single state so long as they are part of a larger interstate trip of the item being transported. Let's stick with the moving example for a moment. Imagine you are a moving team and you're moving people from New Jersey to a new home in New York, but they can't move in right away. So the moving team takes the New Jersey furniture and moves it to a warehouse in New York. Those individuals would definitely be exempt for the first reason. However, a different moving team moves the furniture from the warehouse in New York to the new home in New York. Even though this second moving team never crossed state lines at all, they were part of the furniture's larger interstate trip from New Jersey to a specifically designated location in New York. You better not be sleeping. So what is the purpose of the Motor Carrier Act exemption? What is so important about it that justifies depriving workers from overtime compensation? Well, Congress gave the Department of Transportation the authority to create regulations governing the safety of operations of trucks in interstate commerce. Congress was concerned that if these workers weren't eligible for overtime, then the Department of Labor might create regulations that overlap with or interfere with the Department of Transportation's safety regulations. And as a result, these workers are exempt. Except that the requirement to pay overtime doesn't interfere with the Department of Transportation's safety regulations, and in 1947, the United States Supreme Court even recognized this, finding that Congress might have permitted both acts to apply. There is no necessary inconsistency between enforcing rigid maximum hours of service for safety purposes and, at the same time, within those limitations, requiring compliance with the increased rates of pay for overtime work. So to bring it full circle, if the current proposed legislation to repeal the Motor Carrier Act exemption becomes a law, then transportation workers across the United States and in New York will become eligible for overtime compensation. And finally, if you're a transportation worker that's not paid overtime and you want to know your rights about whether you're entitled to overtime, you can always reach out to me. And also, you can reach out to your representatives in Congress and let them know that you're a driver or a transportation worker, you want to be paid overtime, and you support the repeal of the Motor Carrier Act exemption.